Are you strategic? The answer can make or break your business. Welcome to Strategic Minds, the podcast where we'll do a deep dive in conversations with extraordinary leaders to learn how they think, plan, and act strategically. I'm your host, Rich Horwath, founder of the Strategic Thinking Institute and author of the book Strategic, and my vision is to teach the world to think strategically. Now, let's explore Strategic Minds.
We're stuck.
What do we do? I have no idea.
You need a new strategy.
We need a more dynamic strategy.
The strategy?
You have to strategize.
But you won't strategize.
Let's talk a little strategy.
Welcome to Strategic Minds. Today on the show, I'm excited to speak with Tami Wolownik, Head of People and Organization North America at Siemens Mobility. Tami is responsible for leading the human resources function, serving approximately 4,000 employees throughout the U.S. and Canada, and oversees all activities including strategic planning, acquisition integration, succession planning, employee and labor relations, recruitment, training, and organizational development. Tami is an experienced head of human resources and is practiced at managing what is arguably every organization's most important resource, people. Tami, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Great. Let's begin with your origin story. Please share with us where you grew up and how that environment and the people there shaped who you are today.
Okay. So I grew up in Southern Indiana, one of 5 children from very accomplished parents. Both of my parents were in STEM careers. My 4 siblings were all in STEM careers. And surprisingly, I'm the one person who, at least initially, did not choose to be in STEM. Like I said, one's in nursing, one's in aeronautical engineering, one is in physical therapy, athletic training, and then the other is actually a PhD in soils. All of us have master's degrees, but I chose to go into public relations with a focus on political science. And I think my parents were afraid that they were going to have to feed me for the rest of their lives. And my father was a chemical engineer. So when I ended up with Siemens, he was incredibly proud and almost kind of unbelieved that I had actually ended up in a STEM company. But I love working for Siemens, and it was that, parents and siblings who all pushed to accomplish. We were told we could do whatever we wanted to do if we just put our minds to it, and we all have master's degrees and above, and that really, I think, helped condition to want to work hard and to get into a field where I could really make a difference. So.
Yeah, it sounds like a wonderful environment, with the hard work, that work ethic, that value on education and learning. Do you try to sometimes take those values that you grew up with that help mold who you are and share those with your team? Does those types of values come out in the workplace for you?
Absolutely. And I would say particularly right now, we have very much in Siemens a focus on lifelong skills, developing lifelong skills in our employees. Because of how fast technology is changing, we are really promoting to our employees that you need to be resilient. You need to work on creating a skills-based future for yourself so that you can flex into different opportunities, and you do have the ability to go many different directions, because we don't know exactly, what the technology is going to be. But the more that you educate yourself, the more that you work on creating skills, the more opportunity for growth that you have.
Excellent. I think that purpose around a skills-based future is powerful. And I'd like to dive into that a little bit from your personal level. Over a long career, it's easy potentially to burn out if we're working too hard, if we're trying to achieve too much. Any tips or techniques that you could share with us on ways that you manage your time, your energy to stay as highly productive as you have for such a long time?
Yeah. So a couple of things I think come to mind when you ask that question. The first is that I am in terms of actually managing the time, I'm very proactive about managing my schedule. Of course, I get constant meeting invites and requests that get put on my schedule. But what I do in advance of that, I typically block portions of my schedule. I know that, for example, I'm a morning person. I am most productive in the morning.
Yeah.
I tend to be productive all day if I have to be, obviously, but I am highest energy in the morning, and so I will tend to block portions of my schedule in the morning for what I call impactful thinking. When I know there's 2 or 3 different projects that I'm working on, or that I need to get with the team on, and I need to do some advanced planning, advanced thinking, I'm going to block my schedule in the mornings to do that, because that's when I'm going to give it my best concentration, my best energy. It's going to prevent, hopefully, to the most part, some of those reactive invites getting put on my calendar because they see that the time is already, taken. Um, I also do what I'll call maybe the more reactive time. I schedule time at the end of each day to get to the things that I didn't have time to do, follow up phone calls, emails that I put off because I was doing other things. So I'll call that the more reactive, maybe administrative time. I block a little bit of time for that at the end of the day. It doesn't take as much energy, I guess, if you want to say that, to do those things that you just automatically know how to do. And I leave, again, the morning time for the stuff that's more more proactive and thinking that I've got to do.
Those are great. Those are great. I love the way that you bookend the day. That's something I haven't heard from any of the other leaders I've spoken to. The fact that you reflect in the morning on the important stuff, but I love the idea that you mentioned of carving out time on the back end for more reactive things, because I think that's powerful, because if you batch the reactive things, then I think we're probably less likely to do those during the day as they pop up. So that's a really good tip. I jotted that down for myself to start doing that as well. So great tips there. Thank you for sharing those.
All right, no problem.
I'd be interested, Tami, when I do strategic planning with organizations, oftentimes we'll talk about the strengths and capabilities of the teams that we're working with. And typically, people will say, our teams, our people, they're our competitive advantage. Even before products or services, these are folks that are our competitive advantage. When you think about that idea of competitive advantage as it relates to people and organization, how do you help the leadership team, yourself, your team, the other folks that you work with, develop people so that they truly are competitive advantage, and not just lip service to that where everybody says it, but maybe some people don't put the substance behind it?
And so, again, there's 2 answers, and I'll give you both up front, and then I'll go into detail. The first is you have to focus on the employees, and then you
Yeah.
have to focus on the leadership. Okay, so
Hmm.
those
Yep.
are the 2 elements I want to talk about. When you talk about focusing on the employees, you truly have to have an employee-centric organization that allows employees to experiment, that allows employees to learn, that gives employees sufficient bandwidth to move in their role and to experience their role and to actually learn from it and maybe go a little bit outside the norm for their role,
Yeah.
so that they do continue to grow and continuous development. So that's the first part of it. That's the employee experience. You have to create that trustworthy, enriching experience for employees. And the way you create that experience for employees is through leaders who get that. And so
Yeah.
that's the second part of that question. You have to have leaders who understand that they don't have to be the smartest person in the room, that their employees, and I know this from my own situation where I moved into positions that I definitely wasn't the smartest person or the most technical person in the room. And I had to make sure my employees knew I didn't think that I was the only one who was going to make decisions. I didn't think that I was the only one who had a good idea about how we're going to get stuff done. Leaders have to truly empower employees, and not only empower, leaders have to rely on employees. And if the leaders get that up front, that they do need those employees, they need their ideas, they need their input, that they can't generate everything that has to come out of their department or their group on their own. As soon as they understand that and decide to tap into that, they will be an effective leader, or at least they'll be well along the way of being an effective leader. So I think to truly get that strategic thinking, it takes leaders who understand how to allow that to happen, and then creating a space for employees where they truly can move in that space and learn and grow.
Excellent. There's a lot of powerful things that you shared there. I'd like to unpack a couple of them
Okay.
at a little deeper level. You talked about first the employees and being an
Mhm.
employee-centric organization. It's
Mhm.
I've worked with some organizations from a culture perspective. They talk about innovation. They talk about risk taking. However, at the end of the day, if someone fails, sometimes they go on that unwritten list that
Right.
says, well, they've failed, and we're not sure about them. How do you ensure that the leaders that you're partnering with across the different functional areas
Mhm.
really help support and nurture that idea? Because I love that idea of helping people, move outside the norm of their role, learn from their role. All those things are so important. How do you encourage or work with the other leaders
Mhm.
across the business functions to get them to buy into that philosophy?
Yeah. So there's a lot there, and the first comes with developing relationships with the other leaders. They first have to trust you and believe
Yep.
that you come with integrity and credibility so that they will listen to you. I think, but let's assume that you've done that. You've got those relationships, that integrity, credibility.
Mhm.
You have to demonstrate it yourself. You have
Yep.
to talk with them about the scenarios. What if you did allow some, people to make more decisions? What's the worst case scenario that'll happen? How can you turn the worst case scenario into a learning moment
Yes.
or how can you provide a security blanket underneath
Mhm.
where it will never get to that worst case scenario that the employee will work the process, work the problem, the project,
Mhm.
whatever, but with some check-ins just to keep you informed of what's going on so that if you absolutely feel it's about to go in an incorrect direction or the employee feels they need the assistance, they
Yep.
know that safety net is there. And
Yeah.
so it's providing them the ability to move forward, to make decisions, and really resisting that urge to step in and take over. Um, but giving them that space to do that, but making sure the employee knows the safety net's there. And then, but back to the original question was not how do you do that with the employee? How do you convince a leader to do that? You just have to keep having that conversation. You have to demonstrate it in the work that you do with them, in the
Mhm.
work that you do with your employees, that I do with my employees.
Mhm.
And you have to continue to probe what would happen if you just did this. Or when you do hear that perhaps you have a leader who's not being as empowering as they should be, having
Mhm.
that dialogue about, so what happens if you just give up a little bit here? What does that mean for you? How much more time do you have to take on other tasks or to do the parts of your job that are more rewarding for you? It's just continuing that dialogue. But again, it starts with a relationship of trust and credibility.
Yeah, those are great techniques, and I really like the point you made there right at the end too around delegation. I've seen
Mhm.
research that talks about 41% of things that managers do
Mhm.
technically could be delegated to other people,
Mhm.
but they still do them because either they like to do them,
Mhm.
or they're not really leading at their level. They're dropping down to do other things. When you think about decision making for your team and the idea of delegation, how do you do that? Because I know sometimes when I work with accomplished leaders, it's this idea of you could do it the best probably, and you want to control it, but
Mhm.
that you have to have that faith, that trust that people
Mhm.
will do it. How do you work with the folks that report to you to
Mhm.
develop that ability to so that you feel comfortable delegating and giving them decision making responsibility?
Yeah. So I think early on in that reporting relationship, first of all, you do define your leadership style.
Mhm.
And I will say almost as soon as I get a new direct report who has a level of authority like that, I very clearly say, you're going to find very quickly, I am not going to micromanage you. We
Mhm.
hired you because we think you are extremely capable, extremely able and knowledgeable to do this job. And that's what we're
Mhm.
paying you to do, and I'm going to let you do that.
Yeah.
If you need help, you need to talk to me. If you need my support, you need to make sure you let me know. If there are challenges or barriers that I can help you address, please let me know. But
Mhm.
otherwise, I am going to stay back unless, and I do always put this message at the end, unless I do start to see that we are missing, that some of the objectives aren't getting hit, then we're going to have a conversation about it. I have, it depends, weekly, bi-weekly, again, it depends on the individual, one-on-ones with each of my direct reports. That's their opportunity. It's their meeting to control how they want to, for the most part. I would say 40, let's say if it's an hour-long meeting, 45 minutes of that meeting is 100% them telling me what they need, what they're working on, how it's going, asking me for advice if that's what they want to do. And then ideally, and I'm not going to say we do this all the time, but ideally then the last 10 maybe minutes of it is me probing to find out maybe there's something they didn't bring up. What can I do to further assist you or help you be successful? What do you need from me that's different than what you had been getting, and that type of thing. I can't take credit for this idea. This is a Siemens concept. We did away with performance management several years ago, and we went to this, and it's called growth talks. And again, the point of growth talks is there's not an established way that they're done. Everybody does them differently, but it's routine dialogue between a manager and an employee. Taking your pulse on what's going on in the organization, but really finding out what they're working on and what they need assist with, and what you as a manager can do to help, but not to do for them. So again, it's communication. It ultimately comes down to communication and letting them know up front that you trust them and that you expect them to do the job.
Yes, yes. And you mentioned spelling out or really identifying your leadership style. That's something I think a lot of the listeners out there, what I'd recommend is take Tami's advice there and sit down and jot down, what is your leadership style? What is your leadership philosophy? What does that entail? Because if you can articulate that and put that together and crystallize it for yourself, then to Tami's point, she's able to do that for the folks that she's working with. And that then prevents people from having to assume, well, does she want this or not want this? So I think that's a great advice, Tami, that you shared to help people really accelerate that relationship development by you being transparent up front with, this is what you're going to see from me, versus having to wait 6 months for them to figure out, what does she really want in these situations. So I love that advice. And this growth talk's very innovative. And again, it's funny, when I talk to organizations, oftentimes people feel like innovation's just for the marketing group or the business development, the research group. But I love that example you shared with the growth talks and moving away from performance management. To me, that's very innovative. And I think of innovation as creating new value. When you go to these growth talks, I haven't heard that concept before. Maybe you could share just a little bit for our listeners. You talked about, informal conversations happening on a more regular basis. Any other color you could put to what those growth talks look like? Is there anything written that comes out of that part of it as well?
Yeah. So there can be, but again, what's important is that you need to find the format that works with you and your employee, and it
Yep.
needs to be it needs to be an exchange, but first and foremost, it needs to be about letting the employee decide what they need that conversation to be. If
Yep.
the employee needs that to be keeping you up to date on what's going on and ensuring that what they're doing aligns with your expectations and that type of thing. But I would say the first part of that is really letting the employee control that conversation, because it's about what the employee needs. There
Yep.
is a portion of it where you absolutely have to be the person who finds out what you need to do differently to help them. There's a portion of it that does need to check if expectations aren't being met. How do we get back to expectations aligning if you're sensing that there's a difference in expectations? And then I think there's a part that absolutely needs to be growth focused, hence the name growth talks, on what the employee aspires to and wants to get to. Now, does that have to be every single time? No, but there should be some times in those one-on-one conversations where you're asking them, so how's it going? How have you, this last project was a big challenge for you and you did it well. How did that fit? Did you like it? Is this something you think you'd like to do more of?
Mm-hmm.
How do you see that parlaying into your next career step or that type of thing? These are conversations that you need to have. And so you want to use those growth talks at least some of the time for that future focus as well. So.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks. And really like that advice too. I jotted down, when you do the one-on-ones, have them own 45 minutes of that conversation, give them that floor. I think sometimes leaders potentially could use that to, to do more preaching than listening. So I love that idea. And I think that's really practical guidance. So thank you for sharing those specifics around that. Tami, one thing I'd be interested in, from your perspective as an HR leader, is strategy development. So as I do strategic planning with organizations, typically we have the C-suite team, at the table. We talk through what different folks are doing. And in some cases, when I work with the internal teams like HR, finance, accounting, operations, IT, sometimes their strategy development is, hey, we're going to get together as an HR team or IT team, and we're going to develop our strategy. And then the other approach I see sometimes is they say, well, we're going to let the C-suite team, that includes the HR leader, develop the strategy, and then we're here to support that or implement and just take what they've shared with us. Do you have an approach that you like to see with yourself as far as strategy development goes?
Yeah, ever since I have been in HR, one of the things I've really focused on is that we are here because of the business. If there wasn't a business, there wouldn't be an HR group, right?
Right.
And so,
Yeah.
first and foremost, we have to understand the business's, I don't want to yet say strategy, but where the business envisions itself going, the focus of the business and the future of the business. So, maybe I suppose that is the business. We need to understand the overall business strategy.
Sure.
And we need to make sure that our strategies support the business strategy or aligned, but that they tackle it from the particular expertise of the P&O organization. And I think the difference is we don't just get handed things and said, go make this happen. We work with them on, for example, if one of Siemens' strategic pillars is that we want to be a one technology company, that we're pulling everybody. And so that works in mobility, that works in the other parts of Siemens as well. So we know that we're focusing on a higher tech, innovative offering, in essence, to our customers. Okay, now let's take that out to my team. My team gets together, plus globally they're doing this as well. We're getting together and we're talking about how do we as a P&O organization deliver on that. Globally, they're talking about what the P&O global strategy is and how we help the organization deliver on that through people strategies. And then we're taking that local and saying, how do we develop a strategy that helps deliver on that, aligned with a global strategy, aligned with the business strategy here. So it's all about, I think the word I would rather use is aligning, or making sure that you're complementing. No, we don't go off and create a people and organization strategy or an HR strategy because we read an article that this is the latest thing that HR is doing. We go off and we strategize or brainstorm on what's that vision of where we want to get to as an organization. What is it that's in our span that helps make that happen? Where are we at now? How far is the gap between where we're at now and what we have to get there? What are the different steps along the way? And not a detailed project plan by any means, but what are the different transformations or pivots that have to occur to enable that long run vision? And that's the approach I would say that I take. And it's a lot of aligning. There's global people strategy, there's my team's people strategy, there's the business strategy, but I think it first starts with the business. I've always believed that.
Excellent. And thank you for sharing. That's a great example. And I love the word alignment that you use, because
Mhm.
oftentimes, as I work with companies, there is not alignment between the different functional areas. There's the proverbial silos where you people are waiting for a full year to get back and reconnect with people, and by that time, marketing's off doing this and
Mhm.
IT is doing this, and there isn't as much alignment as there could be. Any tips or techniques that you would have to share with other folks on maybe the cadence of alignment? And are you expecting people at the different levels below you to find their partners and intentionally align throughout the year? Is it done in written format? What have you seen to be the best practices when it comes to alignment?
Yeah. So again, similar to the concept of growth talks, it's that routine, continual, frequent conversations.
Yep.
So just as I have a functional boss, like I said, I report in country to the CEO. And Mark Buncher's his name. Mark and I talk probably at least once a week, if not, 2 or 3 times a week.
Mhm.
And it's just constant checking in, making sure that we are on the same page, or if we're on different pages, because it is okay to be on different pages. But if we are on different pages, kind of talking through that and helping to understand, is that a major detraction from where we're trying to get to? Is that a difference of opinion? Is that another way to do it also? Mark has told my functional boss that I report to in Germany, who is the head of P&O for Siemens Mobility globally, that I'm one of the people that will challenge him sometimes on things, and he says he likes that. So, but I think that's good because he's made me know that too. He's made me know that he appreciates my opinion, that he appreciates my input. It doesn't mean he's always going to agree. It doesn't mean that he's going to say, nope, we're going to do it the way you want to do it. No, that's not always the way. But it's just making sure we're talking about it. And we have, again, it comes back to, and I think I've said it now several times in this, we have a relationship based on trust and integrity. We know that neither one of us is trying to trick the other or pull
Right.
something on the other, and that if we can be honest with each other and talk to each other, then we're both going to get to that common goal we have, which is for the organization to be successful, and that's ultimately what the focus has to be.
Yes, yes, absolutely. You mentioned, the building that relationship so that you can challenge each other respectfully, provide the different points of perspective and view, which is so important
Mm-hmm.
when you're developing direction, you're changing direction. And it gets to this idea of trade-offs within strategy and not trying to be all things to all people, because we do have finite resources at the end of the day. I do find sometimes as I work with internal teams, HR, IT, operations, finance, that because of the internal nature and that supporting nature, they do want to try to be the best team players possible, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
But it also, I think, requires sometimes that ability to say no, to deprioritize things, to have those maybe challenging conversations with other leaders to say, look, we have to make some trade-offs here.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts or perspectives that you have on how you approach the idea of making trade-offs when it's called for in the business?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I think you hit it. It's about managing expectations again. When someone's asking for something, let's say reduced headcount, that's a pretty common one that you hear a lot of times. Okay, I understand we can do that, but here are the deliverables that you had previously asked for that don't go along with reduced
Mm,
headcount.
yep.
Or here are the deliverables that then I'm going to need an investment in systems or an investment in new processes or something like that so that we can reduce something there, and
Mhm.
I don't know, maybe using a reduced headcount's not a good example for a motivating podcast, but
It's okay.
nonetheless, it's about managing expectations. And when we do have to go with fewer resources, then we need to make sure that the resources we do have everything they need to be
Mhm.
successful. Um, I think another part of that is you have to do a good job of organizing, and again, I can't take credit for this, but organizing for impact your
Mhm.
own resources.
Yes.
So if you are faced with limited resources, and you have a lot of standard tasks and you have strategic tasks and you have tasks in the middle, perhaps you centralize a lot of those standard tasks, if you want to call it, into a shared service organization, or you automate as much as possible. And we're seeing a lot of that right now, where we're really challenging our organization to embrace AI and the things that AI can do to automate standard repetitive tasks. And then you put maybe some of the more frequent but not necessarily transactional task into another group, and then you have another group that's really focused on those strategic tasks. And when you're trying to free up resources so that each of those different groups can do things the most effective way. So I think it's organizing your own group to be effective, and then managing the expectations with the CEO, whomever is asking you, on what a resource request means to your deliverables.
Yeah, that's a very thoughtful approach. I like the concept you shared, organizing for impact as well, and organizing your own resources. I'd be interested, Tammy, how often do you and your team look at reallocating resources, whether it's people, it's budget, other things? The research out of McKinsey shows that on average, 92% of organizations pretty much allocate their resources the same way year in and year out. So there a lot of folks are not, checking throughout the year to potentially reallocate resources. How often do you all look at reallocating resources?
Yeah. So within the Siemens Mobility North America P&O team, at least once a year,
Okay.
if not more, my team and I get together, my direct team, and we have a strategic brainstorming session. And this is always one of the topics. Is there a better way we could be structured? Is there a better way we could handle certain expectations? Are there certain expectations coming out of the organization that it's time to say no to? And but tell them, not just say no, but tell them why, what we're going to do instead that's more value add for them. I would say I know, we do this at least once a year. It's usually in December. My team and I get together and do this. And then after they exhaust themselves brainstorming on that, we usually have some sort of holiday celebration. But yes, we do it at least once a year. So
Excellent, and I love those ideas you shared. Just out of curiosity, when you think about those strategic brainstorming sessions that you have at the end of the year, any other questions or tools that you've used in the past years where you said, boy, that really sparked great conversation? You shared a couple just a few moments ago that I jotted down about, what's not working as well, what could we reorganize, or does the structure still need to stay the same? Any other questions or things that we can recall from those sessions that, hey, that's a great thing to really stimulate good conversation?
yeah, I mean, I think the easy one is, if you had an unlimited budget, what
Yep.
would you do? And then you make it very clear, we don't have unlimited budget, by the way. But if
Right.
and then you also turn it into, if this was money you were investing, that's a slightly different version of that question. But if this
Yep.
is money you were investing, how would you prioritize that money? What changes would you make? That at least gets that conversation going. And then, and again, then it's the rules of brainstorming. There's no bad idea. There's ideas we can take further.
Sure.
There's ideas that, let's pick that up again in 6 months. Let's have that conversation again. There's some that, okay, after a while, as a group, we decide that one's not going to get much more airtime. But hey, it was fun thinking about it in the time being. So
Yeah. You've shared a lot of great innovative techniques today. And so I'd love to get your thoughts on something that's been around for a while. And I'm not sure I've seen a lot of new approaches to this or new perspectives. So I'd love to get your thoughts on succession planning. Typically, once a year folks meet, they do the 9 box, and, there's not a lot else around that I'm seeing. What's your thoughts on succession planning, and how do you do it in a way that really sets your organization up for success?
yeah. And I would say, quite frankly, we've been like others where, for a long time it was just something we went through,
Yep.
and we had either Excel spreadsheets, we had certain higher levels in a tool, but it tended to be a more check the box. And actually, it's only just really recently, and here's why very recently it became a topic for us, is because we had, through success, through some people being promoted into other roles, which is great. I mean, that's what you want, but we had all of a sudden we realized we had roles that we didn't have good candidates for. And it was really almost a wake up call that we had, even though we'd done this thing called succession planning, it hadn't really been real. Because now here we were and we didn't really have candidates. We had put names in boxes and it had been sort of brainstorming, but apparently not real. So anyway, we're just now going through that. And again, I have to give credit to a member of my team, or a member of the team who sits here in North America, who developed this approach that she calls the talent spotlight, where we do that part of succession planning where we do talk about who are potential successors, but we don't stop there. We turn it into a skills discussion. Well, what are the skills that are required to be successful in this job? What skills do we see in these successors that you have named? Where's the gap? What skills do we have to develop in those individuals? What experiences would help those individuals? And we've really started, and we're just really starting to do this talent spotlight, putting the focus on the positions, putting the focus on the individuals, and then trying to marry those up in a skills-focused approach. Siemens overall, I think, has done a phenomenal job globally, as well as here in the US. There has been a significant investment in our learning platforms and in this, I think, this movement toward a skills-based organization, and really encouraging people to pick up skills. Yes, knowledge, but skills. Back to the very beginning of our conversation when we talked about you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. You don't have to know all of the knowledge that a certain function possesses, but you do have to, as a leader, you have to have a skill that makes you capable of facilitating dialogue, of differentiating ideas, and then a skill of, quite frankly, making decisions. And so those are examples of types of skills we need people to have in leadership roles. And then there's skills we need people to have in software development roles, and skills we need people to have in project management, risk management, and that type of thing. So again, focusing on what the skills are of the position and of the people, growing the skills of the people, and then making sure that there's an alignment there.
Excellent. And what you touched on at the end there, leadership and things like decision making. One of the things that research shows is that the higher a person goes in an organization, the less development they get. And in about a third of organizations, once you get past the VP level, or at the VP level, there's really no development that happens, which is ironic when you consider the fact that they have such more great responsibility, and they're making bigger decisions. What's been your thoughts or approach when it comes to leadership development at that VP or even that C-suite level?
Yeah. Again, I've been with Siemens for 20 years, and I've always been very impressed with Siemens' approach to this, because Siemens does have a core of programs that fit under a billing called Siemens Leadership Excellence, where it is putting other leaders together who are at the same level or higher in these workshops together, and a portion of it is offsite learning, but then a portion of it is together, where it is really about peeling back the layers of the onion on a leader and helping them to figure out, here's the things you're good at, here's the things that could be holding you back, here are the things that if you tweak just a little bit, it would make a big difference. And they do that with their peers. It's facilitated, of course, but they do that with peers, and not necessarily peers that they work with day to day, but peers who are in similar business scenarios, similar situations. And so they're learning from each other. The other important point, though, I think, is that leaders also need to recognize that they can learn from their employees. Um,
Yes.
and so making sure that leaders, again, don't believe that they're the smartest person in the room, that they, and I'm not saying our leaders aren't smart. Please don't ever, take it that way. But recognizing that part of being smart, if you want to call it that, is listening and tapping into the strength of others, and that leaders will learn from that as well. I've learned so much from the people in my organization who continually come up with great ideas and who teach me new things about how they resolved a problem or how they approached a difficult situation. The other important thing there is that when leaders do that, they need to make sure that they don't take the credit for that. I think you probably noticed a couple of times in mine, I've been very intentional about saying, I can't take credit for this.
Right.
This was someone else, or this was another person on my team. Because when your people see you giving that credit, then your people are wanting to contribute to that, but to your growth, to the growth of the organization. So we talk about helping employees grow, but employees help us grow too.
Absolutely. And you mentioned growth a number of times today. Just be interested, Tami, from your perspective, you've accomplished a lot. You've set the organization up really well in this area. What do you think about for yourself as it relates to growth moving forward? Again, you've reached a very high level. You've accomplished a lot. You've set a lot of other people up for success. And what do you think about for yourself when it comes to growth?
Yeah. I think for me, what growth means for me, because I am getting on that other side of my career, I think what growth means for me is that I still am coming to work excited, energized, and finding ways to contribute, particularly because let's face it, also sometimes the higher you go in an organization, the more challenging some of the dilemmas that get put in front of you are. And if you let things like that weigh you down, it can minimize your impact. And so I think for me, the growth is finding the ways to be better at managing challenges, finding ways to just put interest and enrichment into what I'm doing. Yeah, at this point, I don't know that I'm looking for that next position, but I want every day to still be challenging and exciting. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. One thing you mentioned earlier was your ability to, in the focus on developing relationships, and that really being a key to creating that trust between yourself, the CEO, and the other leaders you work with. As I work with some organizations and I sit with the leadership team, occasionally I'll have the CHRO or another internal leader chat with me at a break and say, I still don't necessarily think I have the right impact or the right voice at the table just yet. Is there any advice that you could share with other leaders around people and organization so that they can have the right seat at that table, that they can have their voice heard? Because this is obviously such an important area as it relates to resources and developing the organization.
Yeah. So again, it starts with the relationship, and that relationship, they're going to very quickly figure out, what's your do say ratio? Do you do what you say you're going to do? And did you take the appropriate amount of time listening before you talked? Because they'll very quickly figure out if people who are in the room to hear themselves speak versus people who are in the room to hear what others have to say and then contribute meaningfully. And so I've been with Siemens 20 years. I've actually been with Mobility since 2017, I guess. So what is that, 7 years now?
Yeah.
So I spent 13 of those years with Siemens in a completely different part of Siemens. I didn't know trains or mobility and this industry. And so the first, several meetings I'm in, I'm definitely listening more. But I did ask to be in meetings where I could listen and hear about the industry. So don't be afraid to ask. The worst thing that happens is somebody says no.
Right.
Then you say, okay, is there another forum where I can get this kind of information? But so make sure you're listening more than you're talking.
Mhm.
So that then when you do have something to contribute, they know it's meaningful, that you're not just there for you. Yeah, I think that's important.
Excellent. Great. I love those tips. The do say ratio is a really nice one to remember. So that's a great memorable one. Asking to be in the meetings. Don't just
Mhm.
assume that you're going to be invited. So, be intentional about that. And then you talked about really taking that time to listen before you speak. So really great practical tips there. Well, Tammy, I'd be grateful if we can close our conversation today with your response to 6 questions we call the strategic 6. Would
Okay.
that work for you?
Yes, go ahead.
All right, great. Number one, what was your first job?
My first job was babysitting, which I'm sure a lot of people have the same. I would say the first real job after college was I was an office manager for an insurance company. I graduated from Purdue and then I worked for an insurance company in Indianapolis. So,
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Number two, what's your favorite vacation spot?
as much as I would love to say beaches or something like that, I have to admit we moved to Lake Lanier also about 7 years ago. And I like staycation, particularly during the summer and fall. In my own house right on the lake, we have a pool as well. So we have the pool and the lake. But yeah, the staycation at the lake is probably the best time.
That sounds great. Number three, what's the one word that best describes you?
I would like to say that it's authentic.
Hmm,
I would like to say it's authentic or empowering. I hope I empower people between those two words. Yeah.
okay, great. And number four, what book has had a significant impact on your development?
Mm. This is an easy one because every chance I get, I talk about this book. And this is not necessarily a riveting book, but it was one that was really impactful for me. Came out about 15 years ago. It's Keith Ferrazzi. I'm sure many people have heard of
Mhm,
Keith Ferrazzi. And the book is Who's Got Your Back? And the
mhm,
reason I like this book is because it's about creating those relationships. So I've talked about relationships a lot. It's about
mhm,
creating those relationships, finding those relationships where people care enough about your success to give you real feedback, positive feedback,
yeah.
but also the other feedback, the constructive feedback that you need to course correct if necessary.
Mhm,
So that, and they don't do it because they want to criticize, they do it because they want you to be successful and therefore they want you to know this and address it. And the reason why that book was so impactful, like I said, not necessarily an exciting read, but the reason why it was impactful is because I think up until I read that book, I was probably, as well as many people who like to see themselves as achievers, I was probably a person who, as a result, I didn't want people to criticize me. I think I wanted to know I was doing a good job.
right.
Um, and I think I was probably sometimes defensive about feedback. And
Sure.
this was a book that made me realize that was a ridiculous position to take. You should be open to constructive feedback if it's coming from someone who has your back. And so,
Yes.
yeah. And so I recommend that book to people I mentor, to leaders, to all sorts of people. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Number five, what one piece of advice would you most like to share with others that would fit on a bumper sticker?
Go for it. Don't be afraid to take risk. Supported risk, but nonetheless risk. Go for it. I've done that in my career. I completely stepped out of HR
Mhm,
in the past, and I was scared, but I did it. I loved it. I was actually in operations for about 7 years, and then when I came to Siemens is when I got back into HR.
mhm.
But it made me a different type of HR person because I sat in a completely different environment and a different type of decisions required and that type of thing. So go for it. Don't be afraid to take risks.
Excellent. You might want to trademark that. I like that a lot. I could see that on t-shirts everywhere.
I
And
think that's
number six,
Nike is similar. Just do it or something. Yeah. So
similar but not quite.
okay.
Um, and our last one, number six, what's the most exhilarating moment you've experienced in your professional life?
Yeah. I would say when I volunteered to actually carve out of Siemens Corp or the standard Siemens to go with Siemens Mobility as we were carving out for a potential merger with another company. Ultimately, that merger did not take place, but we went ahead and carved out. It was a very risky move to leave the safety of big ship Siemens and go to Siemens Mobility. And we didn't know what was going to happen, but it was very rewarding when we had a very successful carve out. The day we went, the official day we went independent, all of our employees were paid on time. All of our employees' data was in the system. We had done everything we had to do to be a successful carve out. We had gone through the change management. It was just very rewarding to do that.
Excellent. You followed your own advice of going for it too, which I love.
Exactly. Yes.
Well, Tami, I appreciate the wonderful tips, tools, and techniques that you've shared with us today to help us maximize our strategic potential. Thank you very much for being my guest on the show today.
Well, thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it.
What are we talking about? Practice?
Practice makes perfect. Practice makes
Profit.
In my strategic coaching work with C-suite executives, I provide them with a copy of the Strategic Journal, which acts as a guide to structure their strategic thinking and planning and a repository for their insights. One of the exercises I encourage them to complete at the end of each quarter is the time assessment. The first step in the time assessment is to record your time spent in 30-minute blocks for an entire week. After you finish recording that time for an entire week in 30-minute blocks, categorize the time spent. So you might have things like email, staff meetings, one-on-one meetings, client meetings. So categorize that and then add up the time for each of those categories. Another important step is to then graph that product. So on the y-axis, the vertical axis, you're going to have number of hours. And then on the x-axis, the horizontal axis, you'll have the categories: email, one-on-one meetings, staff meetings, and so forth. It's really interesting then to see visually where you're spending your time throughout the week. The next part is then to overlay your priorities onto that graph. And when I have executives complete this exercise, 50% are typically shocked at where they're spending their time relative to their priorities. Cal Henderson, co-founder of the digital messaging platform Slack, said, "What are the things that are most strategically important? And am I allocating my time to them correctly? Am I spending the right percentage of time on them? It's easy to get lost in the weeds." So follow Cal Henderson's advice and use the time assessment for 1 week coming up, and then graph that out and see if you're happy with where your time's being spent relative to your priorities.
I appreciate your strategic mind.
Must have a strategic brain.
Great strategic minds of tomorrow right here.
In this segment, The League of Strategic Minds, I answer questions submitted by listeners. Today's question: what are the key areas to cover in a strategic plan? As I think about a good strategic plan, the main thing is we want to answer two questions up front in your executive summary. What are you trying to achieve? And two, how are you going to do it? After the executive summary, I like to see purpose, and purpose typically happens in the form of mission, vision, and values. Mission's your current purpose, your reason for being. Vision's your future purpose. Where do you aspire to be in 10 or 15 years? And then values are those 3 to 5 principles that guide behaviors on a daily basis. Next, I like to see a contextual radar, which is a visual situational assessment. So if you think about a circle with a line down the middle and a line across, you've got 4 areas: market, customers, competitors, company. What are the key things happening in each of those areas? Then you can list any market patterns or trends, customer value drivers, competitive landscape, and company assessment within that contextual radar. Next, you want to identify any innovation initiatives. So where are you creating new value? Where are you disrupting the market? Then you want to think about trade-offs. What are the trade-offs that you're going to call out in your strategic plan? So the areas of focus that are going to drive your business. I like to see that then culminate in a 1-page strategic framework where you visually outline your 3 to 5 strategic themes, and then like spokes on a bicycle, from those 3 to 5 themes, you're going to identify the key activities that drive those themes. And then finally, you'll finish with the GHOST framework, which represents goals, objectives, strategies, tactics, and you'll list that in detail to give people that framework. So if you have any other questions you'd like answered, visit the Strategic Minds podcast page on the website strategyskills.com, and complete the brief submission form with your question. If your question's selected, you'll receive some strategic swag for your submission.
Any insights?
You play to win the game.
Any further insights?
You don't play to just play it.
Insightful.
I want winners.
I played the game to win.
I want people that want to win.
It's very insightful.
To close today's show, our Winsight or idea for advantage comes from Tim Cook, CEO of Apple. He said, "We want ideas coming from all 100,000 people, not just 5 or 3. A much smaller number of people have to decide and edit and move forward, but we want ideas coming from everywhere." What channels have you set up to enable your people to share their insights on a regular basis? If your team needs a new process and tools for strategic thinking, lacks a common language for strategy, is too reactive and tactical, or would like to increase innovation to grow profits and create competitive advantage, visit strategyskills.com, where you can learn more about strategy workshops, online certificate courses, the Strategic Thinker newsletter, and hundreds of other resources. Pick up a copy of my newly released book, Strategic, and take your leadership development to the next level by subscribing to the Strategic Fitness System, an innovative, state-of-the-art executive development platform. Remember, be strategic to be your best.